Thank you again, everyone, for being here with us this morning. If you haven't had a chance to drop your information in the chat, we'd love to know sort of your level of experience with Energy Code so we can fine tune the training to the folks in the room. And today's training is going to be recorded. We'll be sending out the recording as well as the slide deck after this morning's training. We can, I think, go ahead and get started. There's still a couple other folks joining, but let's dive in and make best use of time. So just as a quick introduction, my name is Jess Blackwell. I work for the High Sierra Energy Foundation, and the High Sierra Energy Foundation is a member of the Central California Rural Regional Energy Network. And regional energy networks, as I think many in this room are familiar with, have existed in California for a little over 10 years now. The Central California Rural REN was approved in September of 2024, so we are fairly new in the REN space, but we're very excited to be serving you all. And if you're not familiar with RENs, just to give you a quick background, RENs are really a framework for local governments to design and administer energy efficiency programs. And RENs really allow us to serve our communities in ways that traditional energy efficiency programs may not be able to. A lot of opportunities for us to design programs specifically for our communities. And this has led to RENs focusing on hard to reach customers as well as disadvantaged and underserved communities. Just a little bit of background on who's involved in the Central California Rural Regional Energy Network. Again, my organization, High Sierra Energy Foundation, is a nonprofit based in Mammoth Lakes and serving the Eastern Sierra. Our REN is led and administered by the County of San Luis Obispo. And then we have partners in Monterey with the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, in San Joaquin Valley with San Joaquin Valley Clean Energy Organization, and then the County of Ventura serves an advisory role. And then I'm going to pass it over to our trainers this morning from Inbalance Green Consulting. On the line, we have Jennifer Rennick and Grant Murphy. Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Rennick. I'm a licensed architect and a certified energy analyst. And Grant, also from Inbalance Green Consulting, is here on the call with us. And Grant's going to monitor the chat and interrupt me as we go and kind of dive in or add to what I'm talking about. And thanks for folks that put a little bit of their background in the chat for us, because like Jess said, we'd like to kind of address maybe the topic that is most useful to you. Grant's also a certified energy analyst and has a lot of experience with commissioning and passive house. And we, obviously we work with plans examiners and folks in the field and builders and architects all the time, but I tend to have a designers like architects perspective and energy analyst perspective, and Grant would, I think, skew more towards make it real in the field. What does the code really say perspective? So between the two of us, hopefully we'll be able to hit on everything you need. As part of our services with the CCRN, we offer online trainings, in-person trainings, and we also have helped with specialty services with other jurisdictions with Title 24 compliance and support of the standards in general. And we're also energy code coaches for the REN, and that code coach service is available to anybody who has a project in that entire region or lives in that region. And it's open to plans examiners, architects, builders, project owners. So if someone comes up to you at the counter and they have lots of questions and you don't have time to go through the code, you can give them to us and we would be more than happy to answer their questions and work with them. And they can reach out through the website, or we have a phone number that you can, and materials that ought to have been mailed out to almost all your jurisdictions now, so that you would have that information available to pass out. And then we will follow up with email or phone call if needed. And then a lot of the common Code Coach questions we get, it could be even as simple as how do I get my Title 24 registered? We're happy to help with that. And then it could go, some of the Code Coach topics could be more nuanced, like we were doing some outreach for one of the counties where the staff had a lot of questions about Cal Green and accessible EV charging. And we were able to answer those questions, but that morphed into doing a more customized training for those people because they were having some development take place in their community where they needed more information on EV charging and accessibility. So reach out to us. Today, this class does have learning units, and the slides will be provided to everyone attended at the end so that you can have this as reference and notes. And I believe the learning units are self-reporting. Is that correct, Jess?
Yeah, if anyone would like a certificate of completion, just feel free to shoot us an email to request that. You can reply back to the email we'll send with the slides and the PDF.
Okay, thank you. Today, for the kind of hot climates and specifically really looking at residential construction, we're going to hit a little bit on kind of what's going on with the energy code for 2025 and its goals, and touch on the California climate zones that are applicable to this topic. And then we're going to look at some design consideration strategies, specifically for the envelope. And then we're going to dive into a little bit about heat pumps for the hot climates and then how that kind of ties into indoor air quality, given that most heat pumps aren't providing your outside fresh air, and then where ventilation cooling could come in, and then a couple of topics specific to heat pump water heaters. So the big picture for California Energy Code is that California is trying to support a clean energy future for all. So that includes encouraging electric heat pump technology for space heating and water heating, and improve our indoor air quality and the outside air quality through clean energy production. There's been an expansion on PV systems and battery storage standards, especially for the non-residential occupancy types. And there's been some updates in the code that help save water through reduction in water use in the home, specifically, like that would fall under Cal Green, but also in better efficiencies for non-res chillers that use water for their cooling. So back kind of to that residential scale, just kind of FYI, it applies to all our climate zones in California, which means the whole state of California, where heat pump space conditioning is the new kind of baseline. It doesn't mean you have to install heat pumps, but your project will be compared to a like project that would have heat pumps for space heating and water heating. And then that also can include you balance ventilation with energy or heat recovery systems, which is kind of goes hand in hand with bringing the fresh air into your building, meeting ASHRAE standards. And there's certain field verifications that are going to be required under these new standards. So California has 16 climate zones, and our CCR-REN spans from the coast all the way across the state into the mountains. So we have a really diverse REN in terms of a swath of microclimates. And to better understand the climate zone you might be in, there's a great website now that the California Energy Commission has put online. It's the Easy Building Climate Zone Finder, and we've included a link to that. And then you can also get more detailed information on your climate zone and what those design conditions are. That's been included in the joint appendices, which is part of the entire grouping of documents that are part of Title 24, Part 6 Energy Code. So beyond the standards, there's manuals, and there's a lot of reference appendices, and there's details on how our projects are to be modeled. But if you need that information and any of it isn't easy for you to find, reach out to us as code coaches. We're happy to help. So CCRN climate zones, the ones that we really consider kind of hot would be sometimes climate zone 4, which is where I live on the more coast of California, where we have a need for heating in the winter and a need for cooling in the summer. In the summertime, temperatures are in the hundreds, but usually typically in the high 90s. Okay, so still relatively mild compared to like climate zones 12, 13, and 14, which span, San Joaquin Valley and into part of the Eastern Sierra, where then we definitely can see some, winter temperatures that are quite cold, but summer temperatures in microclimates in those areas where our design temperature could be well above 95. And sometimes we need to really plan for peak cooling at really high temperatures, 100, 105, 110, etc. So with that said, we're going to kind of look at what we would need to know to work with those hotter temperatures and some of those hotter microclimates. When we talk today, just as a reminder, Energy Code Title 24, Part 6, we have Energy Code compliance documents. And we often, when we talk about the code, we're referring to things as having a mandatory requirement, which is applicable to all your project types. And then we have a prescriptive component package, meaning that if you follow sort of this checklist approach, a recipe card, I like to call it, then your house, your building would comply with the energy standards. But you have to do all the things on the checklist. That kind of checklist, that prescriptive component package becomes the baseline that we use for our performance method, which is our energy modeling. We use a computer program to model the building, and we enter into our computer program all the things that we see on the plan set that the architect gives us, or suggestions for better and improved energy performance. And then that new building is compared to that prescriptive requirement. So for those of you who have to read those Title 24 Energy Code documents as maybe part of your work or just want to better understand, it used to be that time-dependent valuation was a metric we used. Then more recent code 2022, we were now talking about an energy design rating. And the thinking was that it would be more simple to have basically a score from 0 to 100, and you could look more easily at your building and understand if your building complied by where that score landed. Now we have in the 2025 code, we have a new metric, which, we still look at, are you passing or failing your project? But this new metric is called a long-term system cost. And it is, there's an efficiency part of it. There's a total part of it that you need to comply with. And there's a source total annual source energy component. But there's also this new aspect for new construction that's called peak cooling. And this specifically applies to climate zone 4 and 8 through 15. So that captures the 4 we talked about and our 12, 13, 14 climate zone in our CC-REN region. So peak cooling really is part of California Energy Commission's attempt to say, yes, you can design a building and use trade-offs, but those trade-offs can't cause a very high load on air conditioning during the peak time of day when it's the hottest out and everybody needs air conditioning. So new construction needs to kind of keep their peak cooling in check is what that's about. So how this might look on, the performance method results is that a project, for example, would look at that long-term system cost. Again, it's just a new metric. What we need to know is if you pass or fail. And as analysts, we can look at that and kind of help guide our clients and the architectural design to be more energy efficient. There's a source energy that goes with it, but here's that peak cooling component, which is new, and it's only, for climate zones 4 and 8 through 15. And then if all of them pass, then the project complies. So fairly straightforward in that sense, but how do we deal with the peak cooling? That's really what we're going to kind of talk about today, because that's probably the biggest kind of thing to overcome with your code compliance. And then we'll get into the more specifics about the heat pumps and some of the other things that matter with hot climates. Okay, before I go into kind of this concept of designing for hot climates, I always check in with Grant, go, hey, Grant, you want to add anything? Did I miss something? Or has any questions come in yet?
No, that was good. The overview, general process of the code. Again, I mentioned in the chat, just shooting questions, or I can stop Jennifer and pause on an item if we need more clarification.
Yeah, and feel free. I mean, with a relatively small group, if there's a question about some picture or something you just want to know more about, just ask, because all of this is really applicable. Well, okay, so typically, from the architect's perspective, from a designer's perspective, to design for hot climates, a lot of times, in school and as an architect, we talk a lot about orientation for keeping the heat out in the summer and shoulder months and letting the sun and heat in the winter. That's kind of the basics of all of that. And so that means you're strategically placing windows and window shading, considering your low solar heat gain coefficients on your windows. The code really is now hitting on strategies for keeping your attics and roofs from overheating. So how and where your attics are insulated and the employment of cool roofs, for example, can help. And then having well-insulated walls to keep out unwanted heat as well. And then kind of the old school too was to use interior thermal mass as part of a passive strategy, but that also implies that you would have excess heat during the day that could go into the thermal mass, and then at night, when the temperatures are cool enough, you would cool down your thermal mass. And the strategies are a little bit different these days, where we try to have a better controlled envelope, don't let in too much heat in the first place, and then use the night venting just to clear out all the air of the house and cool it down that way when you have basically free outside cooling air that you can introduce to your house quickly.
I think it's worth noting too that thermal mass isn't part of the California code modeling software or the code requirements itself. They have a couple items that show up for like if you're heating the slab with hydronic heat or in commercial buildings, if you're holding a space to a certain very low temperature, like a freezer or a cooler type unit that's not a walk-in box that you drop into a project. But generally, thermal mass is not considered um, a design option for code compliance.
Right. Right. But when you think, yes,
It
exactly.
still comes up
But
in projects, of course.
yeah. And a lot of times for climates that are hot, I mean, it's just for a long time, the trend was to design that way. So the code's kind of following also some changes in design trends. And then kind of along with that, um, is our mechanical systems have improved a lot. So we have heat pumps now that work very well in really cold climates and in hot climates, extreme temperatures. For our climates, for these hot climates, ductless systems are more energy efficient, and that's reflected in the code. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And just some strategies in general is then those outdoor condensing units, you want to protect them from excessive, exposure. And then we want to consider our heat recovery for the ventilation air. And then night vent cooling, like whole house fans, different than bringing in fresh outside air throughout the day as needed. But in certain of our hot climates, even though we're crazy hot at night, it often can be cool. I mean, crazy hot during the day, it can often be cool enough at night that it's worth having a whole house fan to just fan to evacuate all the air in the house.
Yeah,
It's really
Dale sent
climate,
in a comment.
microclimate dependent.
Yeah, Dale sent in a comment about whole house fans, just saying they were popular for several years, but he finds them non-existent in his area. I see them often as low-cost solutions in alterations. A lot of homes that don't have a great envelope or design or windows in general, it's a low-cost solution to get that night vent cooling. When we're talking about designing for higher performance or just a new code home, usually we look to have that air come through your ventilation system, lower CFM volumes, and it's not usually like a primary strategy because you're doing so much better on the envelope that you don't need that like large evacuation rate of bringing in fresh air for cooling. But like Jennifer mentioned, it is still viable. It can be viable, and it's really common in the alteration space. Um, Dale
Yes.
said that is it the human element part of the reason they're no longer required? I don't know, Jennifer, what's the current status on the requirement side of a whole house fan? I don't think there's any climate zone that has it as a requirement anymore.
Well, it was prescriptively required in the sense that for certain climate zones, and Grant, go ahead and take a quick look just to double check me on 2025, but for sure under our old code 2022, it prescriptively, like climate zone 9, for example, and some of the other hotter climate zones, it would be part of that prescriptive package. So it's part of your baseline. And you didn't have to do it, but you could do it. And then, so it really depends on which approach you're using for compliancy. And then that's a great question. Double check me on whether it's still part of the prescriptive baseline, but it's still viable and you still get credit for it when you do the performance method. And then kind of this last thing we want to touch on before we'll wrap up is the heat pump water heaters. And there's a few things to know about the integrated heat pump water heater types, and they do have an operating range. And the heat pump water heater is kind of the new baseline. You don't have to do it, but it's what you'll be compared to. And there's a synergy that can be considered for hot climates Well, for a lot of different, actually for all our climates, is you can install that heat pump water heater interior and let the cool air that comes off that heat pump water heater have a natural synergy with the warm air you're getting from your washer, dryers, and refrigerators, and or placing the whole unit in a garage and helping to keep your garage cooler in the summer. Okay, now for some of these design consideration strategies, specifically the envelope. So in that prescriptive component package approach, there has been an update on our new construction vented attics and cathedral attics. And one of the things to, I think it's useful to understand if you're in kind of the space at all of energy efficiency and Title 24, Part 6 calculations, is that typically we would look at our baseline buildings, prescriptive buildings, of having ducted system for your heating, cooling, and the ducts would be located in the attic. Okay. And then for that kind of process, we'd specifically look at insulation just below your roof deck and then ceiling insulation at the attic level. And so for our climate zones 12, 13, 14, for example, and you can see that climate zone 4, where I'm from, has the same requirement. So you would have this R19 up at the roof deck at the top of your, let's say you had, trusses, the top of the trusses, and then you would have R38 ceiling insulation. Okay, great. But they've added, you've got this 2 versions of what's called option C now. And yes, it gives you ceiling insulation only, and whether or not a radiant barrier is required up at the top of your roof deck. But it's really important to understand that it's the ducts and the air handler are within the conditioned space. And there's an implication with that within the conditioned space that would come up with our HERS rater and plans examiners, et cetera. And then now in the prescriptive method, we also have an option just for like a cathedral roof where you would have just an R38 insulation in that cathedral roof. But again, all the ducts and the air handler are within the conditioned envelope. So when it comes to the design considerations for the hot climates, I mean, I think some of the big questions to ask is, the designer would be asking, and the builder also, homeowner, do they want a vented or an unvented attic? Because there's unvented attics perform better in the hotter climates. But there's implications for that. Are you going to go for ducts in the attic? And then whether it's vented, unvented, or you're committing to ducts and condensed space, or just go completely ductless, which some homeowners aren't a fan of because a lot of us aren't used to how that looks. And then the other is whether it's worth it to employ like night vent cooling. So for fun, I took a small home that I'd worked on and I ran it, through various scenarios in climate zone 14. And really the main hurdle for all the project, the different scenarios and for a number of the projects we work on is now this need to reduce that peak cooling that I talked about and what strategies would do that. And so the best choice is really, he passes Title 24 easily on all the other metrics, but then there's this peak cooling. And so just moving to a ductless system was the easiest. And then the next is those scenarios where the ducts are in conditioned space, either with an unvented attic or a vented attic, either one, but ducts in conditioned space. And then if you add that whole house fan, and depending whether your attic is vented or unvented would determine where that whole house fan sends its air. Do you send it into an attic and then out so it cools your attic at the same time, or do you send that air out to the outside directly? But the those scenarios were really the best choices. And then the next best would be ducts in an unvented high performance attic, which means the R19 up at the top of it, top of your attic, top of your roof truss, or a rigid, continuous exterior rigid insulation, and then R38 on the ceiling, and adding the whole house fan again, just boosted your overall performance, but also helped with some of that peak cooling load reduction. And then ducts in a vented high performance attic, and then again using the whole house fan. So the unvented attic performs better than a vented attic, but there's architectural details and all that to deal with. And then in this case, even though in past times this project would, meaning under the other codes, it would have passed, now with the peak cooling, just to have ducts in a vented attic that only has ceiling insulation just doesn't work. And even adding a whole house fan and even dropping the solar heat gain coefficient on the windows, et cetera, it helped, but it wasn't enough to curb that peak cooling. So I just kind of the big strategies now for passing our energy code on new construction is really looking at ductless systems and ducts in conditioned space. So
Real quick, Jennifer, I just want to interrupt
yeah,
while we were on the roofs.
yeah.
Danis had a question. Can you just give a quick benefit of a radiant barrier and what it's doing? I think you had yeah, I missed it. He was asking if how is the attic considered ventilated? I think she said, how is it considered conditioned? The radiant barrier is just the foil-faced OSB that's facing the interior of your attic. So it's not changing the conditioned, unconditioned condition. That's a bad phrase.
Yeah,
The
you're right. So you can have a situation where the ducts themselves, and I'll show you right after the slide is the slide I'm going to better illustrate like what we mean by ducts inside the conditioned envelope, meaning not up in the attic where it's hot. And so if you do that, then it's okay just to have insulation on the ceiling, kind of similar to the diagram on the right-hand side, just insulation on the ceiling. And you would have a radiant barrier as part of maybe the plywood or OSB product that you were using for your structural sheathing. And you don't necessarily have to have insulation up against the roof deck. That's a scenario that would pass the Title 24 for that. And then if you just go, with a ductless system, then the best practice for that is to make sure that your ductless, in this case, I'm showing a ceiling recess cassette, but if it's wall mounted, that's fine, or low floor mounted, all ductless, no problem. It's within the conditioned envelope. Where it gets a little tricky is where folks are putting the recessed ceiling cassettes and putting it into an attic space, but not carefully including the whole system within your air boundary and thermal boundary. So I just wanted to give some diagrams of what that could look like. And sometimes it actually means building the builder would build a box that would be big enough to air seal it, build it out of the drywall, air seal it, tape it, and it fits over, or you're basically creating a void in the ceiling for this recessed ceiling element to go to. And then now your attic insulation can completely cover it. And it's now within the conditioned envelope. So that's kind of a best practices and for using your ductless systems. And then for ducts in conditioned space, which would show up as a ECC or used to be called HERS measure, And it's also something that requires sequencing on the builder's part. So if you're going to claim ducts in conditioned space with your Title 24 report, then what it means is that, for example, you could have specialized trusses built where part of the truss creates a void. And it's, the proportions would be a bit different than what I drew here, but I was trying to draw everything all at once in one diagram. But if you think about the truss spanning across your whole house, and then having an area in the center of the house that sometimes is referred to as an inverted soffit, it's really pretty straightforward to do. And the sequencing is that once the trusses get placed, and before a lot of the other insulation can happen, you have to get in there, or before the ducts can be placed, you have to get in there and put in your tape and sealed drywall, or you could use OSB or plywood, but that goes in first, the part of that inverted truss. Then you come back and add your framing that's eventually going to hold the ceiling drywall. Then you place all your ductworks in there. So it's a sequencing of trades, really. And then once you do that, you can add the rest of your ceiling sheetrock, and then you can add your ceiling insulation that meets your high performance attic conditions. And then the final step is you'd come back and you'd add that drywall at the bottom of that inverted soffit to give everything a clean look. So that's the part that we see a lot of times in the field is sometimes the sequencing isn't quite right. So all the ductwork's going in, but they haven't really created that lid, that hard lid for the inverted soffit. And then it's really hard to get in there and install it properly or seal it around the duct. So it's all about sequencing, really. And then it's kind of a similar thing if you're going to actually build a soffit into the space or create a drop ceiling in your hallways to do this. But you got to get some of that other drywall in place, then the framing, then your ductworks, then come back and add your rest of your drywall, your ceiling drywall, and then you can do your ceiling insulation. And so that is worth noting because we're seeing this credit showing up on the Title 24 reports a lot, but it's harder to do in the field than if you don't get the sequencing right.
I think that's the big takeaway. On the form, there's just one cell, and for the energy consultants out there, all you have to do is say, "Hey, my HVAC is in conditioned space," versus, "Hey, it's in the attic," and it's just a designation to the system. And so you get credit, like Jennifer mentioned, for these in conditioned space. And so we've seen it for years. It's not necessarily a new thing. It's just coming up more and more, and there's more guidance in how you should verify that it's to be in conditioned space. A lot of these projects we're seeing call it, and then it's just not actually happening, which turns into credit that was not earned and homes with inefficient HVAC systems.
Right. Yes. And then there's a kind of a whole nother thing that's coming into play that a lot of the strategy in unvented attic performs better, but we're seeing that a lot of homeowners, because of fire concerns, and sometimes environmental concerns, they really don't want to use spray foam insulation. So they end up wanting to use an air permeable insulation like rock wool or something similar. And so there's just some additional requirements that you don't find in the energy code, but it's in part 2.5 of Title 24 in the residential building code. And then if you have air permeable insulation, like in our example here, high performance attic, but you want it unvented, so no soffit vents, no gable end vents, no dormer vents, then you would follow the code requirements for something called a vapor port, which just allows the vapor, the moisture that's in warm, moist air. It's lighter. It goes up to the tops of ridges and peaks. And then there's a formula that you would follow, the architect could follow. And it can either be like you drill a lot of holes, or you could do, a slice or strip of the hole in the plywood, like the picture on the left. And then with that, you do have to supply a little bit of air when your heating cooling system's running. You do have to supply a bit of air into that space. So it's technically, we call it unvented, but it's really a semi-conditioned unvented attic. And then it has these diffusion ports. And then there's a rule of thumb that goes through that. So this whole conversation can be quite nuanced, but if this comes up and anyone has questions about it, reach out to us in the code coach. And just kind of FYI, there's 2 sections of the code. The energy code is telling you, hey, your high performance attics and R19 plus the R38. And then the question is, what types of insulation are you using up at your roof deck? Which then this other part of the code kicks in to what you have to do for it. For wall assemblies, just make them perform better. The prescriptive recipe card checklist approach is continuous exterior insulation. And in the hotter, more extreme climates, it's trickier to trade that away, but it's possible to trade it away. And because of concerns of fire, we're more and more seeing and recommend to use a non-combustible exterior insulation like rock wool. And then just FYI, there is now Vulcan Vent and others are coming up with heat sensitive, ventilation strips you could put at the very bottom of your rain screen, so that you don't just end up with your siding and then a void that fire potentially could get into. If it's hot enough, the intumescent coating on these Vulcan vents will close up and then stop there being a channel of air that can flow up behind your siding. And then it helps to have the non-combustible exterior insulation like rock wool. But anyhow, so high performance walls. Windows, though. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I had a quick one. Just you showed the ridge vent, and we had a question about snow and ice. Um, Jennifer's focusing on hot climates here, but snow and ice with a ridge vent. My quick take is just that there's a couple more levels of detail to pay attention to, unless you would say otherwise, Jennifer. Maybe a baffle. You're more concerned about that condensation, like ice damming that vapor port that's cut into the roof. It's just like a higher level of risk when you're introducing that strategy with a snow climate. That means you need to pay extra attention to the detail of it. I don't know if it is something, Jennifer, you tell me, is that something you just wouldn't recommend in a snow climate and achieve your roof envelope differently?
Yeah,
Pretty
actually,
much.
I mean, when you're in those, yes, when you're in those climates where you're dealing with snow and high extreme temperatures, I mean, personally, I would consider using continuous exterior insulation on the top of the roof deck. So I would use the performance method, and I would do that. And I would consider doing specialized vents that are appropriate for snow, or just employing one of the strategies where you don't need to use vapor ports, because the vapor ports are only going to be applicable if you have a situation where your client or homeowner just doesn't want to use any kind of foam. So, but spray foam, 2 inches, closed cell spray foam would seal that. And then if I were in a snow climate, I would do continuous exterior insulation on my roof anyway. And then now we're in a strategy world where you don't have to have vapor ports.
Yeah, when you're in these more extreme climates, a climate that has the highs and lows, uh, we're a lot of the times we're just talking mitigations, and sometimes hey, you can do this vapor port solution for reasons you might want, but it just means paying more attention and doing it very precisely with maybe some added components, or opting for what Jennifer's saying,
Right. And the
a
reason
simpler
I mention
solution.
it, yeah. And the reason I mention it is because, like in the 90s, the 2000s, and even after that, because the existing houses now, when we go back and take a look at this remodel and we pull apart the roofs, we can see that the whole idea of using insulation up at the roof deck, the idea of insulating at the roof deck was great, but we weren't as concerned about whether our whole construction assembly was allowing moisture to work its way up through the cracks in your drywall, around your light fixtures, up into your attic, and then eventually collect up at the peaks of the attic. So then we see dry rot and structural degradation of your sheathing and a lot of problems. And so now part of the code includes these solutions because a lot of people are still, insulating with vapor permeable insulation products. So that's why we mention it. Okay. Oh boy, I'm noticing the time. Jeez. Okay. That was great conversation though. I love it. So with your window design considerations, hot climates, I mean, you get a whole lot of glass that's facing west, and you probably already know the project in the summer, your house is going to cook. So really what we're trying to talk about is using strategically placed smaller windows for balanced daylight, and a lot of times putting them on opposite sides of the house or the walls, but using smaller windows so that you get good light, but you're not exposing yourself to a lot of unwanted heat gains. And just there's kind of 3 things that we look at when we look at windows. One of them is called a U factor. It kind of measures how much heat transfers through that assembly, and then a solar heat gain coefficient. And that is a fraction of the solar radiation that's emitted through the glass. And there's specialized coatings that we can put on the glass that rejects unwanted heat. And a lot of times when we do those things, we sometimes diminish the visible light transmittance through it. But really the main takeaway I want you to have here is that there's so many new window products available to us that are designed for more extreme climates. And a lot of them do include triple pane glass. You could get very low U factors, which means they perform better. And you could get very low solar heat gain coefficients, which helps keep unwanted heat. And then with that being said, the amount of glass you have. So again, this is kind of the design side of it, like architects, homeowners, designers. This is stuff to pay attention to, where I did a bunch of modeling for these types of climate zones, and really I've developed these kind of rules of thumb that help, where if you can target the area of glass as compared to your floor area for south to be 10 to 15%, but the west, keep it, 0 to 2%. And then just keep your total glass around 16 to 24% for these climate zones is really helpful. Now, in contrast, for like climate zone 4 and 5 here on the coast, and 3 even, where on that other side of the CC-REN territory, we could target 20 to 24% of south glass and 25 to 35% of our floor area being glass overall. And our project actually performs better with more glass just because of the way our climate zone works. But where you are at some of these climate zones, it's better to reduce the glass. And then I included some rules of thumb for how to make sure you shade your windows. Even with low solar heat gain coefficient, you want to shade it. And then the thermal
I
mass
wanted
comes
to
into, oh,
I
go
want to
ahead.
throw out two things real quick on the windows. One, that quantity thing is always fought after, so typically people exceed it and just expect that it's harder to pass when you exceed it. You're fighting a penalty you're taking because you're exceeding of quantities of glass. The real thing I wanted to jump in on was the U factor solar heat gain. I know we have a couple plans examiners in here reviewing Tile 24 reports.
Oh, yes, good point.
U factor, less, a lower number is better. So if you get a report that says, hey, everything's point 0.3, and the inspector in field is like, hey, everything is less than point 0.3, that is good. That does not warrant a red flag or any kind of conversation or rejecting anything. The solar heat gain is a target number. Some projects can perform better with higher or lower solar heat gain. It's not a one is better than the other, high or low. So I've been telling plans examiners and inspectors that you're trying to get within like 0.03 plus or minus, giving them some wiggle room. The real issue we're running into, and it's a whole nother story, there's a lot of things happening, is that projects are coming in with a 0.45 solar heat gain, and then the quote is a zero point 0.2. And that difference will make the project fail and has caused a lot of homeowners issue. So getting that idea of solar heat gain being a target number versus the U factor being a, hey, this is the maximum that you should see. And that's not very well explained on the form. So you kind of just have to commit it to memory. If you have questions
Yeah,
about this stuff, feel free to reach out. We're talking about it all the time these days with our planning departments or
right.
building departments.
And then, like I was saying, this kind of old school, the thermal mass, you used to get credit for it in Title 24, not anymore. That hasn't been true for a little while. And really, the point of it is that if you do have like slab on grade, construction is exposed in these extreme climates, when you get such, like we were saying, you could have both heating needs and extreme cooling needs. You're going to want to really look at it insulated thermal slab, insulated slab on grade, which you do get credit for in Title 24. And then real quick, PVs are required, still required in new construction, but not so in additions, alterations. Batteries still not required. And, climate zones 12, 13, 14, your PV size is fairly significant for what's required compared to some other climate zones. So kind of keep that in mind. PVs don't like to get hot. So, from a design side of it, it's like, okay, your PV systems, you can use higher standoff. So they're 6 inches off the roof for better air circulation, which does also then shade the roof, which keeps your attic cooler. But more and more we're seeing in these kind of climate zones to go for ground mounted and like shade structures. And then really, you could even do this for your home garden, but in some of the snow areas, and you actually get better performance when your panels are straight up vertical and it faces east west, believe it or not. And I can teach I could give you a whole class on this, but I've listed some rules of thumb that could come in handy for people. And then real quick, just kind of a case study, the whole idea of calculating overhangs for summer shade and winter solar heat gain and grouping windows together so that it's easier to shade them as needed and easier to, when they're grouped together, you minimize your heat gains and heat losses through the frame. And also, operable windows allows for that free cooling and ventilation when the air temperature does drop, and that can be part of a whole house fan strategy And then this just gives you kind of that buildup of what that could look like for having continuous exterior walls, because you do want to have a good thermal envelope, both for the heating and the cooling. So when it comes to the heat pumps for our hot climates, it turns out that the heat pumps that's really good for the extreme cold climates that are Energy Star rated for cold climates often are the same ones that are good for our hot climates. And that's because they, with the new refrigerants, but also the specialized inverter motors that we have, they've designed that whole system where they're just able to work better in extreme temperature climates. But the two things you want to look for is a high SEER2 rating, SEER2, SEER2 rating, and high ambient cooling. Unfortunately, there isn't a one place, one stop shop to find heat pumps that are good for hot climates. So I've listed a few here that are pretty common, and these all have very high SEER ratings. And like that Carrier unit, for example, their Infinity series, it can also be connected to indoor. That one goes to an indoor air handler, and that's rated to still be operating at 125-degree Fahrenheit in cooling. And then same with Bosch, Mitsubishi, Daikin, the Fit Aurora. They are rated for temperatures 122, 115, etc., and with good capacities. And then Pioneer, they have their Quantum High Performance series, they call it. So they have a great heating range. So again, it works down to -22 degrees, but also their cooling range is up to 131-degree Fahrenheit with that high SEER2. So those are the two things you really want to look for. And then other kind of design considerations is wall mounting or mounting so that it avoids the snow, your water, your wind-blown debris. Putting it under a large overhang or roof covering protects it from other adverse weather. And then use compact line runs to avoid that capacity downgrading, because also as the temperature gets really high outside, the capacity drops when you need the capacity to get higher. Same with the cooling. So keep your indoor units compact, close to your outdoor unit, and then get the lines immediately inside the envelope, and don't run your lines outside the house like you would commonly see in the coastal regions. And then because these units don't bring in your outside air, we often talk about how do you get your fresh outside air. We don't recommend using an exhaust-only bath fan. However, with that said, there are some unique concerns for your energy and heat recovery ventilation system for extreme climates. You do want to get one that is rated for extreme climates, because if you're also in areas that freeze regularly at winter, then you don't want to pull in freezing air and have the componentry of your HRV or ERV freeze. So you do have to have one that's rated, just kind of a heads up. And then from a code perspective, there are some new mandatory measures that are specific to the HRV and the ERV. And just even now, some what might seem like common sense things that had to be put into the code because of how these were installed. So, for example, the outdoor air intakes have to be weather and rainproof covered. Seems like it makes sense, but it wasn't happening, causing issues, et cetera, et cetera. And then also fault indicator displays need to be there, and you need homeowners need to have access to these units so they can change the filters in them. And this just gives you a kind of a visual example of, a split air handler and the ERV, HRV unit near each other, walkway. You could change the filters easily. And this was in a large attic with the ducts were in the attic, and then the attic itself was insulated very well. And then part of all this, and this still is an option, I have it here that climate zones 8 through 14 still have a prescriptive requirement, but I know that was from 2022. So Grant, did you?
Yeah, it's still in there.
Okay, good. Because I started to second guess with that question. I was like, did I forget? Okay, so yay, it's still in there, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. It just means it's going to show up in that baseline. But from most of the calcs I do, I mean, the system works. I live in climate zone 4. I'm having one installed again, but I live in an older house. And so I'm excited because you can turn this thing on to also bring in warm air during the winter when we get Santa Ana winds. I have a colleague who does that. So they use it both for cooling in the summer, but do a quick refresh, free heat in the winter, which I think is fun. Now, last, the kind of the heat pumps for domestic hot water. There's kind of we could teach a whole class on just these heat pumps, but this is the new baseline. There are some new mandatory measures in the code now, and you're going to find it in section 110.3. And then there's a bunch of like design considerations for really how to design for these. Garages that don't freeze are great because you have plenty of space, plenty of air volume, etc. There are a few things you need to worry about, like condensate line, and they do exhaust cold air, relatively cold air, as they pull air in through the top of the unit typically, and then they exhaust cold air after they've pulled the heat out of the air and put that heat into your water. They do have a operating temperature range. And so on the integrated type, which means you've got your heat pump on top and the big tank of water down below, the best, the brands with the widest operation range only will operate down to 37 degrees Fahrenheit. So not very cold, and certainly above freezing. So be careful kind of how you place these, but the upper range goes quite high at 145 degrees. And what it basically, this operation temperature means is that if it goes outside these ranges, it means the unit goes into electric resistance mode, which uses more energy and it takes more money to operate. And then there are split systems. And again, it's similar to a split system on your space conditioning, but that upper temperature range is 114 degrees. So this, the Sandin or similar could be appropriate. Now, where this comes into play, plans examiners, plan checkers, what we're seeing on the Title 24 reports is that it's not really clear, like, is this tank really in conditioned space or is it in your garage, but is it ducted? Does the air come from the outside or the inside, etc.? And that's something to be mindful of. But the other thing we're starting to see on kind of retrofits and remodels is closets being built for these. And if you're in these cold, extreme climates where you get freezing, we don't recommend that you put it in an outdoor closet. But as far as your energy calcs go, in some of these climate zones, it basically looks at that outdoor temperature and says, okay, this unit's going to go into electric resistance heating mode for part of the winter, but then come summer, it's so dang hot outside, that tank of hot water is going to stay plenty warm, so the compressor hardly has to run. So sometimes it's a wash, but better than that on the performance side, when I played with the sample houses and really looked at it is that a total indoor location was the best, and having the air come from indoors and having the air exhaust into the indoors was the best. But then this gives us some kind of unique design considerations. And so this is where I'd say it's worth looking into having a synergy with appliances that give off heat, like your washer dryer or refrigerator. And then some companies get more high end, like LG, they'll even show advertisements with their unit because it's square shaped and it fits with a kitchen or a laundry room scenario, et cetera, et cetera. But that's something to take into consideration. And then again, from that plans examination side, because of the new mandatory measure in section 110.3C7, there should be calculations on there, some indication that this whole unit will have enough net free area within the space, or volume of space. And also, if you use a louvered door approach, that the net free area in that louvered door is sized appropriately. And then, unfortunately, what we're seeing, which is the reason for all these mandatory measures, is that a lot of times we're seeing these heat pump water heaters being shoehorned into really tight closets with solid doors. So it's not meeting the manufacturer's recommended nor the code required minimum volume around the space. And then with the solid door, not louvered openings, it can't communicate with a larger space. And then also the exhaust port sometimes is pushed right up against the a wall, and there's potential damage that could happen there. And sorry, it looks like we're running a little bit over time here. We had so many great questions. I am going to just plug our Code Coach service again. If you have more questions, hand this over to Jess real quick, and then it's up to Jess, but Grant and I can stay on the line to answer any more questions as needed.
Amazing.
But thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was great. And Grant, really appreciate all of your expertise. I'm happy to stay on the line if anyone does have questions. I know we're a bit over time, so thank you all for sticking with us. I do very quickly just want to ask for folks' feedback. We are launching a Zoom poll here. If you could just answer our quick 3-question survey, we would really appreciate it. And also just want to make sure folks know our next course is coming up May 27th, and that's focused on 2025 Cal Green. If you are interested in signing up for that, you can find that at our website, of course, at ccrren.org/courses. And do feel free to shoot us any requests or any feedback you have to make these training sessions more valuable to you. We're looking for ideas of topics that folks are interested in, so please do feel free to share that with us. And again, thank you all so much for sticking with us this morning.
Yeah, I always plug the Code Coach at the end. It's free for everybody. So you and your staff, new hires, it's a resource. Also for customers or clients or people that come into your front counter, feel free to pass it around. We have rack cards and stuff like that we try to get to all the building departments. If you don't have them and you want them, please reach out to myself or Jess, and we can make sure to get them to you. We're trying to hit everybody. Yeah.
Oh, and I did see real quick that comment about the plumbing code, saying, hey, you can't install those where it freezes. Yes, we know. And yet I just got done taking pictures of a couple of installs where it freezes.
It got
So
ignored.
yeah, so I want to point that out. Yeah. So
Appreciate it, Dan.
yeah, totally appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.